Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. This is a podcast with book coaches, editors, and besties as we discuss books, not as readers, but as writers, to draw inspiration from great books and lots of laughs. And this is the very first episode as we go into our new read for this month, which is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Y'all, we have a jam-packed next 4 episodes, and today is our overview. Y'all, we got so much to talk about. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and check in on Rachel to see what she has going on over at Story Cipher. Rachel?
Hello. First of all, we're going to all be very proud of me. While Dana was doing the intro, I kept my hands to myself. I did not gesticulate in any way. I just sat there and smiled like a normal human being. And this is an achievement for me, pretending to be normal for 30 seconds. So over at Story Cipher, so we are in the final module of Nav 101. So that means that we are going into how to approach the revision process. So we have this, I'm not going to lie, kind of banging workbook that we use that like breaks down how to. So at this point in the program, they have done 2 full drafts. So this is like really getting into the nitty gritty of like revision on their story. And so we have this workbook that breaks it up into each of the 4 acts to help them like review the individual act that they're working on, ask some pointed questions, be aware of, right, what's my story promise? What's that internal arc that my protagonist is on, and giving them some like heuristics or some metrics against which they can measure their individual acts. And so that's what we spend the final month going through, so that the purpose being, even if you revise and you write 3 drafts and job's a good one and you're done, or whether you're writing 3 drafts or 4 drafts, or some people will write 10 drafts. I talk to my students about this when I read anything from people who are in traditional publishing, so agents, editors. On average, the numbers they're quoting are like 7 to 15 drafts. Like, it is a high number. So I'm like, whether you are writing 3 super tight drafts or you got 15 to go, it gives them a way to move through the revision process beyond the 6 months. So if there are more drafts that they want to do, they know how to approach that, and they have the workbook to help them like actually work through that process. So they have something on deck, whether they're going to finish or if they need more drafts in the future, depending on what they're doing and what they need. So that's what we do in the final module, so that they are like prepared with all of the steps for the entire process. And so we're kicking that off for this month, and we've got our working weekend and all of those final like crescendo things that we're getting ready for. And yeah, so it's always a really fun one, because this is the part where people are like, oh, everything makes sense, right? Because it's like everything from the last 5 months, it all kind of like comes full circle in this last module. And people are like, oh, okay, it's like, I see the problem solving that we've learned, and like the draft planning that we've done, and everything I did with my first draft, and like it all just like comes together. Oh, it's so good. I love it. It's like my favorite part. It's so good.
It's so like when on A-Team is like, I love it when a plan comes together.
That's right. And I know that one specifically because of you.
I love it. Introduced me to that. Favorite quotes.
So that's what's happening over here, but I'm pretty sure you've got some juicy stuff happening over at Danger Tales. Would you care to share with the people what's going on? Because I think if they act fast, they can get in on it.
Listen, y'all, we have so much going on in a good way. June is like power packed, because we are on the eve is what you could say of us having our summer break. This is our first year having a summer break. Yay, summer break.
I'm going to be so ready for that when it hits.
Listen, I hope I know how to break. I'm getting better at it. So what we have coming up this month is 2 big things. One, we have the I think this is our third or our fourth romance boot camp,
Mm-hmm.
romance writers boot camp. And the past versions have been with one student on the hot seat. And I think, yeah, because y'all know we record early, I will be planning to do the teaching just on the romance 4-act structure.
Oh, I love the
Because
four
I
structure.
realized, like, we've done it. We've done workshops, but none of those have been like, each act has its own day. And when we've
Mm-hmm.
done the boot camp before, one of the downside, well, the positive has been that people are seeing it in action, like
Yeah.
living color.
Mm-hmm.
But the downside is that it is stalled by wherever that writer is.
Yeah.
So me going over an individual act, I'm going over it, but it's being crammed in the time that I have left.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to have the boot camp for a week to be able to teach it and just cover the 4-act structure for romance. And at first I was like, I don't know. And then I was like, this is going to be pretty interesting, to be able to do it all. This will be only the second full time since having the ARB finalized. It also will be Lord's will by the time I'm doing it that I have all of those sections written for the book. So it's going to be very interesting. Like, unlike before, like, I don't need to redo slide decks. I already have workbooks. I mean, all of that is done. Like, it's
Yeah.
been done. So it's going to be very interesting to have like clean cut teaching on every act. So I think it's exciting, and it's always like a mad dash to say, okay, we got to get all of this in an hour, kind of thing. But yeah, so we have that. And then the final thing is we will be ending the month with our first summer retreat. I've told you guys about that. And you'll hear more about it over the next couple of episodes. But yeah, so this month is going to be insane, but in the best possible way. Like, I'm looking forward to it. I'm always looking forward to once I sit down and just review all of my notes
Mm-hmm.
and pull it all together and um, really lock it in. Because we don't have hot seat students, I love being able to add back in examples from
Yeah.
books that we've read and
Mm-hmm.
books from our book club, which means I can easily go back and re-listen to the book club discussions,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So it means like over the next 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to be crushing.
Yeah.
I'm going to be crushed. I'm going to be like, but it's going to be worth it. So that's what we have. So I feel like it's a lot, but not.
It's a lot.
And
It's a
it
lot.
is
I'm just gonna go out on a limb here. Because so people,
just like
there
it's a
should be a
lot.
link in the show notes, right? That people should be able to click so that if they want to sign up for the boot camp, they can. Can you talk a little bit about like what does the boot camp look like? Can you please define what ARB is and what you're
Oh
going to
yeah, that's
walk
true.
them through? Give the people a little information if they're thinking they might like to write a romance novel.
Well, first of all, it is for romance. ARB is Addictive Romance Blueprint. It is technically, when we do the romance writers boot camp, it's not about ARB specifically, which
Mm-hmm.
is ARB is how you plot a romance.
Mm.
What we're doing in boot camp is learning the 4-act structure. And that is so important
Yeah.
because a lot of times what people are aiming to do is use different beat sheets and structures that were not created to write a romance.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so so the boot camp covers the 4-act structure,
Yeah.
and the ARB approach in the book that I'm writing goes through how I plot a romance. So
Yeah.
how you learn that structure and how you turn that structure into
Mm.
plotting your story,
Hmm.
which I think is two separate things.
Yeah.
You can use similar content, but it's two separate things. So the boot camp is 5 days, Monday through Friday, for 1 hour a day. We'll be covering an act each day, and then the final day we will be sort of bringing it all together. I'm sure the first day will be an overview before we dive right in. And what you'll have the opportunity to do is every day at the end of that session, being able to have time set aside then to look at your story.
Mm.
I think that people should have a story already in mind, especially if you've already started plotting it or even started working on it, because then what you can start doing is looking at it through this lens, right? Did you really set up your act one? Do you set so are is ready to love, and each one of the acts, we go through all four acts, and then you're also getting the workbooks that you go through it. And this one will be, I guess, at the end of the day, it will be um we usually, I don't know how we're going to do this part, so I'm not going to speak on it, because usually for boot camp the replays are only available for 24 hours. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how we're going to do that part, but the point of this is that you are learning it, and then now what you're doing is you're sort of taking on that lens and looking at your story. And when you're looking at your story, you are saying, like, are you setting up those sort of bookends
Mm-hmm.
so that as you move forward, that things are escalating? And we're looking at it on 3 tiers. We're looking on it at it in your external, your internal, and your romantic threads
Mm-hmm.
across your story. And what I love is the fact that this can be applied to any romance.
Yeah.
Unlike most of our general teaching, I may use romance stories as the example,
Mm-hmm.
but it's applicable to any genre. The bulk of my clients are romance
Mm-hmm.
or romantic fantasy. Like I
Yeah.
always say fantasy, but it's usually people who are writing fantasy in the scope of romance, right?
Yeah.
Um, we do have some that do cozy, some that do suspense. But when you're talking about the romance writer boot camp, it's specific to romance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, so it's a week of literally just like going in. I'll and so if you go, we'll put the link to Danger Tales in the show notes, and there will be a bar at the top of our website, usually where you can click on it and go to see the details.
Yeah.
And then for the retreat, that's only for existing students. So
Mm-hmm.
if you are a part of our community, then you can come to the retreat, because that's teaching, yes, but it's more of a
Yeah.
like, you kick off your shoes, you're
Yeah.
comfortable, you
It's
got on your
communal. You
leggings.
come together. Yeah.
Yes,
You
look,
were like
you got
doing
on.
work, but we're doing work together. And almost like imagine the difference between like meeting in like a meeting room or a classroom versus meeting in a living room.
Exactly. And it's that, but and it's also an opportunity for everyone to take what they learned from the boot camp,
Mhm.
thinking about their story, and then
Yeah.
coming into the retreat.
So good.
So it's like it's going to be some instruction, questions, the floor open,
Yeah.
and then talking about that in a sense of their individual stories, but also we'll be talking about their series. And so it will be a lot of teaching,
Yeah.
but that's normal.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be really good, and for me personally, um, doing them back to back after finishing those chapters that I'm
Hmm.
writing, I
Yeah.
think it's going to be so interesting. I think I'm hopeful that it'll help me work out any final kinks.
Yeah.
Doing something for so long and now trying to distill it down
Hmm.
in just a few chapters.
That's it's tough.
Insane. Oh, that is
Yeah.
understatement. I'm just
Yeah.
like, let me just teach a class. If I teach a class, I was like, do you know how many words you get it in an hour?
Yeah, right? You're like, you can go through, you can hit it, you can hit caveats, you can go like you can get everything in there. And it's like, it's almost like starts to come so naturally because you've done it so much. But then when
Yes.
you have to like streamline it into like, okay, first this, then and you have to like finagle it. But there's like so much that you want to say and you just want to like dump it all out there. But you're like, I gotta organize it, make it, ugh. It's a whole
And
other.
there's so many like they're gonna be aspects that I'll be able to teach in the retreat that just won't have time in the
Yeah.
boot camp. Like I want to spend a little time on talking about trifail cycles.
Oh,
I've been
great.
seeing issues with that people really
Hmm.
need to understand that understanding the plot adhesion
Hmm.
in a romance is so important.
Hmm.
And like there's just some very specific moments that when you learn how to nail those, it informs everything else going forward and
Yeah.
looking back.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other part. And when you're in the retreat environment, it's a lot more relaxed and sort of
Yes.
delivery
Yes.
versus in the boot camp it's like you have a certain amount of time. It's during the day. It's a certain
Hmm.
amount of time, get it done so the recording goes up and
Yeah. It's much more, it's got that, like, again, regimented feel. It's very like we got to be on our marks in terms of, like, we said the things an hour, taking the hour, getting through everything in the hour, versus the retreat has that kind of a nice, like, I mean, it really is
breathing.
like, it has that expansive feel, right? Where you're like, we're going to come together, there's going to be teaching, and then we're going to like work, we're going to reflect. And it's just got that nice, like, it feels like it's like the difference between wearing like jeans and stretchy pants, like,
Come on.
sweatpants or leggings.
You know I'm good with some liquor.
These metaphors keep
Come
getting
on.
weirder and weirder. I'm like, it's a difference between a conference room and a living room. It's
Come on.
denim versus stretchy
Stretchy
pants.
pants. Come on. And everybody know I love some stretchy pants. But yes. And it is. And even as I said that, it's a blessing, right? Like to be able to do what I love to do and to be able to share what I know and understand and communicate it in a way that helps someone write a book, 5 books, 10 books. Like,
Yeah.
so I just roll up the sleeves, get ready to start tossing pixie dust around. You know what I'm saying?
Sounds good. I would like a little of that dust to fall on me,
Come on.
please. I would like that very much.
Give me 2 shots of dust over. Yeah. I'll send some dust your way. Oh my gosh. But with that said, y'all, we're about to get it in. So to transition, well, any sort of links or anything, check them out in our show notes. I know it's going to be coming up in a future episode, but also the opening of the enrollment period of the academy is coming up. So make sure you keep your eyes open. You don't have to wait to hear Rachel say something about it. You can go to her website now and sign up for the wait list. Like,
Yes.
you can. And it's all about just helping you to write the stories that you really want to write and be able to
Yeah.
tell and to be in an environment that supports you in creating that. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, we love talking about these stories, but baby, that's what we do. Okay, so with that said, come on and give us the blurb for Fourth Wing, and then we will jump into the overview.
Yes, ma'am. All right, here we go. 20-year-old Violet Sorengale was supposed to enter the scribe quadrant, living a quiet life among books and history. Now, the commanding general, also known as her toughest Talon's mother, has ordered Violet to join the hundreds of candidates striving to become the elite of Navarre, dragon riders. But when you're smaller than everyone else and your body is brittle, death is only a heartbeat away, because dragons don't bond to fragile humans, they incinerate them. With fewer dragons willing to bond than cadets, most would kill Violet to better their own chances of success. The rest would kill her just for being her mother's daughter, like Zayden Ryerson, the most powerful and ruthless wing leader in the Riders Quadrant. She'll need every edge her wits can give her just to see the next sunrise. Yet, with every day that passes, the war outside grows more deadly. The kingdom's protective wards are failing, and the death toll continues to rise. Even worse, Violet begins to suspect leadership is hiding a terrible secret. Friends, enemies, lovers, everyone at Bisgayath War College has an agenda, because once you enter, there are only 2 ways out: graduate or die.
Come on, that's a good blurb. So as we dive in for this discussion, we're going to start off with a couple of notes before we kind of dive into what we're going to talk about. This story is classified by most as a romantasy. Rachel and I talked at length offline in our pre-show about the fact that Romantasy is a fairly new sort of reader influenced
Mm-hmm.
sub niche.
Mm-hmm.
We're not saying by any account that romantic fantasy or fantasy romance is new, but
Mm-hmm.
it is its own version of a sort of mash-up hybrid, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. Um, there is not there. I'm starting to see books pop up about like writing it now because of it being popular, but I would also like to say we have theories, right? I have theories. Rachel
Yes.
has theories. And at the end of the day, because we are actively working with clients writing in these spaces, we are working or writing in this space. Part of that is just what you do to be able to help people to write.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say this in general, and then I'll also see if there's anything that I missed that Rachel wants to add. One of the things that I love about this is it is a mixture between romance and fantasy. The necessity of having both is there, that they are both equally there. And what I believe as a writer and an editor and a coach is that we get the fantastical elements of the fantasy and the otherworldliness and a lot of the things that you love about fantasy, like the greater stakes, the people groups, the setting, the magic. But you also get the benefit of something that romance readers love and that is so unique to romance, which is a happily ever after. And there's something about having that sort of carrot hanging
Mm-hmm.
out there that does shift the way a story reads to a romance reader, because all the while we are going through the highs and the lows, but our mind knows that there's a happy ending here. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something very unique to this time. I think it's unique to what people need in books
Yes.
right now. And I
Mm-hmm.
could go on a whole soapbox. Like Rachel will tell you, I could talk about this forever because this is the kind of stuff I jam on. But I think it's important to sort of look at that as a backdrop
Mm-hmm.
of where this sort of emerged from. And so over the past few years, it sort of has been mashed together and called a romantasy. But I would also say a caution of every romantic fantasy or fantasy romance is not a romantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yes.
would also say that every romantasy is not the same romantasy,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a lot of fluidness in this. And because of that fluidness, I think you have a lot of people attributing stories to that genre
Mm-hmm.
because it is popular. But if I were to look at your story, or Rachel was to look at your story, we'd probably have differing opinions about that because of the amount of time that we've worked in the area.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good way to say it. So as we read this story, we are sort of thinking about that, but looking at the story on its own while having that as a backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so what I'll say before I pass it to Rachel to see if there's any additional comments before we get to our notes, I'll say there's a few things that I would say are commonalities as me being a person that my specialty is romance. Um, I have a lot of clients that do fantasy, but it is in the romance sphere. We do paranormal romance, shifters, um, and that will fall somewhat in this arena. But there are some things that are really important. The happily ever after, the ending, you will have a happy for now. Um, but that is important. I also feel like there are the fantastical elements, things like the world building, the people groups, the suspension of belief that you have. I think I said the magic, but if I didn't, the magic potentially. And magic we'll talk about that, especially over these next couple of episodes. Magic can vary significantly, but it's usually a part. And there's a sense of um, otherworldliness is normally how I lump it together. That is very unique to that author, but it's really important to define. And we sort of talk about that a little bit in here without saying it that way, because for some people it may be, how the origin story,
Mm-hmm.
or how it which is how it came to be, how we got shifters or how we got magical abilities, right? How do we get into this sort of dystopian state or whatever? That's very unique to the author. The other thing that I think is important is the fact that usually in a romantasy, you have an increased sense of stakes. Romance is, you know it's a happily ever after, but the stakes are usually that they think they're not going to find love. But we know they will. It's what it is. And if you deal with some of the darker, whether suspense, the romantic suspense, thriller, dark romance, you'll still have higher stakes, which is the circumstances that they find themselves in, but it doesn't take away the ending. And then the last thing that I would put as a general thing that I look for in a romantasy is that there is a with the increased stakes, there's usually some sort of consequences to life itself, right? Like life or death stakes, not just for the protagonist as an individual, but it might be to a people group or to the world as they know it. And so that sort of escalates a lot higher than what you would normally find in a romance, like a modern romance. Um, are all of these exactly like this? No, but you usually will find some spectrum of this in each one of them. And this is where your reading and your understanding and your take on delivering in the genre comes into play. Rachel?
Yeah, well, and so, I think one of the things that's just sort of like worth highlighting as well is the reason we care about these designations, again, is so that you can find the correct audience for your book, right? So that
Absolutely.
right, if you are, advertising as a fantasy romance versus a romantic fantasy or a romantasy, like this is drawing a different audience that comes with a different set of expectations, and that's the reason why, like, in a conversation like this, we will futz over definitions, right, and of what we call this thing versus what we call this other thing. That's really important for you as the writer to understand, so that you can make sure that not only are you delivering on, like, let me one, so that you know what the expectations are. I know Pinky's coming out, baby. It's getting real. So that you actually know what the expectations for your genre and your niche are, so that you can deliver those intentionally and be aware of them in the actual construction of your story. And so that when you go to market it, you bring it to the right audience. Because then when you bring it to the right audience, knowing what those expectations are, then you know that you are delivering the right expectations to the right audience. Because if it winds up with the wrong audience, they're going to come in with a whole other set of expectations that you may or may not meet, because there's a mismatch between how you marketed it and the audience that received it. And so that's why I think it's sometimes like helpful to like toggle back and be like, okay, the reason that we will like go into like the nitty gritty of this is not just because we're editors and we like to nerd out about it, but it does impact you as a writer, and it is really important for the way that you show up to your story and deliver it to, again, the finding the right audience. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of have that as well.
I want to add one more thing to that. And we say market, but we also understand that whether you are deciding to shop, right, and you're
Mm-hmm.
looking for traditional publish, that
Mm-hmm.
you have an audience of one. Your
Mm-hmm.
your expectations are really have to laser in if that's where knowing, what your goals are and then what those expectations are in delivering. And I'll also say before I turn it back to you is we have at the time of this recording our last bonus episode on the podcast is episode 74. We talk about genre contracts and knowing what your goals are for your writing. So this will be a really great time to understand. So when we do this is a great story, and it's not to nitpick or whatever. This is all about how do we stack the odds in our favor. But
Yeah.
go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, no, that's actually exactly where I was kind of headed. Of like, if you look at the macro structure of the book, and it's important to say this now because we're going to get into some nitty gritty about some stuff about the book. And so making sure that we preface that conversation with, if you look at the macro structure of book, it works, right? It is properly structured the way that we talk about, the stakes, the challenges within the academy escalate appropriately across the course of the story. We have a clear midpoint, right, where something shifts. We, kind of take that ride down toward an all is lost moment, as the story continues to complexify and the stakes continue to escalate. And then we have a climactic moment, right? We hit the climax that sort of brings the threads that we've been following throughout the story all together. And then it resolves insofar as the book ends and we know that we're springboarding into the next book, but we are kind of on like on a cliffhanger, I think, at the end of this book. So when we look at that overarching structure, it's functioning in all the ways that we look for structure to function in a story. So now what we look at when we go through the story and we talk more specifically about the stakes and how they do or don't work, or about the magic and how it does or doesn't function in the story. This is really about our approach as developmental editors who are tasked with helping the writers we work with create the best possible story that they can, deliver on the thing that they are pursuing, and stack, like you said, as many of the odds in their favor as we can. So when you're looking to a book like this, we're taking the opportunity to, if this were our client, say, I would shore up this thing and I would lift this thing and give a little more stability to this other thing to maximize your shot in the market. And so I think those things, again, just kind of help preface, because we're going to have an extensive conversation that's going to go in all kinds of directions, and making very clear our stance and perspective to start with.
We do everything but sprinkle pixie dust. Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. So with that said, we're going to get into this overview. This is meant to sort of just catch some of the sort of highlights or the things that we really want to mention now before we get into the detailed episodes that are coming up. Rachel, what are some of the things you'd like to sort of make sure that we touch on in this episode?
Yeah, so I think, when we're teeing up the conversation and looking ahead to the conversation we're going to have, there is something kind of worth mentioning here. And I connect these two things, even though they don't always go together. But so this book falls into the new adult category. And that does affect how the story looks and plays out, because my experience was that this feels very, very close to YA. And I think that, really new adult is quite similar to YA, just we are over the age of 18, basically. It's kind of tends to be the delineator there. And as a part of that, the story itself is written like 90% dialogue and like next to no prose. And that, I think, also adds to kind of that YA feel of the story. Now, I don't think that 90% dialogue is specific to new adult. I think that might be more, I don't know. Do you know, Dana? Is that particular to Rebecca Yarros, or is that?
I think it's just how she chose to write this.
Okay, that's a stylistic thing. Okay, because
Yeah.
I was like, I don't think that that's common to new adult, but new adult is not especially new adult in romance is not necessarily my specialty here. So those are actually two sort of separate points then, that, we are in the new adult category, and that is going to impact some of the things we see in the story. But then also this story does something interesting by being mostly dialogue and internal monologue and very, very little prose. So those are so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and it's going to come up throughout the episodes as we go forward as well. And then also, when you're looking at something, that's saying it's this and this, romantic suspense, romantic fantasy, romantasy. When you're combining genres, it does mean that you are responsible for both of those genres. And it's something to be mindful of, that you are juggling two things and you need to be aware of both. And so we'll have a bit of conversation about what that means and what that looks like, to kind of prime everyone for the conversation we'll be having going forward as well. Mm-hmm. What about you? What are some of the kind of the aspects that you want to make sure we cover today?
I think, I'm sure some other stuff will come up, but a reminder that this is a book one, and neither of us have read book two. So, the fact that this is the springboard into the books that are to come is worth mentioning. And also of how we establish the world, establish Violet. And I think that's really important. And so, whether we know 100% if some things land or
Mhm.
not is not fully there because we don't quite know where she's going. Like,
Yeah.
we got an idea, but it's not all the way there. And so I think that's important. And we'll just talk about that a little bit. The other thing that we'll say in passing, and I don't know if we'll get a whole lot into it today, but I do want to mention it, is that this episode, we sort of took a different approach when we go into the other episodes, and that almost every episode, we sort of have a moment where we get to talk about the fact that, I work a lot in romance. Rachel works a lot in fantasy, and sort of how some of the things that we're talking about are the same or differ, just so you can have it as a point of reference and maybe even as a note that you take into your reading to see how that plays out for you across the books that you're looking at as comps, um, to prepare for writing if this is the genre that you really want to go into. And then the final thing, which I think will just be more in passing and mentioning, but we mention this a lot: read, read, read. Like,
Yes.
we say this all of the time,
Hmm.
but y'all, for this, I would say if you ever brushed off what we said before, hear us now, because this goes back to those entry notes about this is an evolving, emerging sort of
Yeah.
um, mashup of a genre that
Hmm.
is getting very specific, very competitive,
Hmm.
and the more that it is finding traction with readers, the more you're going to see a lot of nuances. And
Hmm.
so, I mean, I think I was even heard someone talking about a romantasy mix up with Pride and Prejudice. Like,
Whoa.
is exactly like, so I think it's so important, and we will say that over and over and over again. So, with that said, I think that is a really great place to sort of kind of take us back to the top of talking about the fact that this is new adult, and then going into the conversation about this genre mashup.
Yeah, so something that's interesting is this new adult age demographic, right? So we're looking at people who we're maybe tail end of high school. We tend to fall into that like 18 to 20, I don't know, 22 range maybe, because 22 is like when you graduate college. And so you're looking at a younger a younger demographic of both your protagonist, and then likely of a lot of times your reader as well, that you're because when your protagonist is younger, you tend to attract a younger demographic. That's not universal, but that's common. So what's so interesting is that does mean that it can at times feel like YA, right? Because you have sort of, again, we're new adults, so we're barely out of being young adults, um, which did also kind of result in some sticking points when it came to like intimacy on the page, of that new adult feeling sometimes kind of on the younger side, and it causing that like it's like jarring at first. You're like, wait, no, she's 20, she's like, right. And you sort of have to like remember that.
Remind yourself.
um but it's worth kind of contrasting, because we are decidedly a new adult with this category, but we've had adult fantasy that uses this same age group, right? So uh in Ninth House, right, this is a story that takes place in a college with a college age protagonist, but it reads like and it is marketed, it's categorized as adult fantasy. And so something that you kind of pointed out in the pre-show, Dana, is like, when we're looking at a protagonist like Alex Stern, she is someone who's sort of forced to grow up fast. And so she doesn't behave like her age. And that's kind of something. And we even actually see something, I think, with Vin and Mistborn, right? Vin is
Very
technically
much so.
YA age. I think
Yes.
she's 15 or
16.
16.
Yeah.
So she's very much in YA age, but this was originally marketed as adult fantasy. Now they've shifted it also. They market it both in YA and adult, but um, she had to grow up fast. And we also have another protagonist, right, who is actually a grown adult. Kelsier is like, I don't know,
Yeah.
30 or something.
And the bulk of the team they're all adults as
Is
well.
yes, is like adults. But Vin is someone who's in a position of she has also had to grow up fast and she doesn't behave or face teenager problems. She's very
Yes.
much someone who is young, who is facing adult problems. And so you can kind of contrast that, and that can kind of help you orient sort of uh, Fourth Wing versus some of our other books that have featured younger protagonists but are marketed towards adult, versus Violet, who is kind of, she is falling inside of these sort of new adult struggles of she very much is a 20-year-old and having 20-year-old kind of problems, even though she's in a college where life and death are on the table.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's, well, I'm going to back up just a hair. I think it's interesting when you have a story that the stakes aren't in alignment with the age. And I think
Yeah.
that's where you begin to have the rub, because if you have any sense of um, ambiguity in the
Mm-hmm.
writing, your
Mm-hmm.
mind is going to naturally go towards what you are feeling
Mm-hmm.
from what you're reading. And I
Mm-hmm.
think she just reads young.
Yeah.
And so for us to go to the explicit nature, yeah, this book gets heated, which is what has everybody excited. But I'm just like, okay. And y'all know I like a good chandelier swinging moment, but it just was something. So I think it's something to be said about, how you position, how they relate to themselves in the world,
Mm-hmm.
the type of stakes that they're up against, and it's worth mentioning that Violet is just trying to live. Violet is just trying to not die today, right? She is being very clear. She's not even trying. She's like, listen, I just want to live past today. She's very like, and so that helps. But I think some of those other things and knowing where the story goes, it would have helped to have her feel a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, and I would say, um, um, the stakes do escalate in a way that you do get folded into the world, and so you sort of, it's not as in your face, but it, to me, it was always something that never was far from my mind, even when it sort of steamed up, until we probably got towards the last third or so of the book. And I think that's mainly because of the shift in circumstances,
Yeah.
and that environment changed enough
Mm-hmm.
where you started to understand the stakes that they were up against. So I
Yeah.
think that's important to note.
Yeah. Yeah. So do we maybe want to, this might be a good opportunity to like shift over into talking about, right, kind of juggling two genres here.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
as we sort of shift over into those stakes and the way that they escalate and the concerns, we sort of get into, we sort of tapped a little bit on the aspect of the romance and the intimacy and some of those, as well as the escalation of stakes that kind of comes with our fantasy setting as well.
Yes. Yeah, sometimes when Rachel be saying stuff, y'all got to think about what she's saying, especially when we were recording all day. So here's the deal. Romance is always about um getting to that happily ever after, and what it's going to take for the love interests to transform into the version of themselves that they can be open to wholehearted love, right? That they are loved fully, for who they are, and as close as we can get to unconditional love as possible, right? And so when you mix having the fantasy aspect and having the increased stakes, I think the best way to nail this, I'm gonna say it that way. The best way to nail this is that those stakes are intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
This book does this well,
Yeah.
meaning the likelihood for them to get to that happily ever after, and them encountering the scope and scale of the external stakes, or the stakes, that the story stakes that they're encountering, are intertwined. So therefore, them being successful in their external pursuit as well as their internal pursuit of love are interconnected. And so when you have the merging of these two, you are responsible for both.
Mm-hmm.
You're responsible for exposing us to the world, helping us to understand how we got here, helping us to understand what's at stake, who are the people involved. And when we say what's at stake, what can die, what can live, what can thrive, what can change. How does it change how she feels about herself, her family, her people group, right? About the life that they live, and everything in between, because every story has different stakes. But the point of this is that when you're in this scope, the height of those stakes are higher, in a sense that it usually shifts to life and death,
Mm-hmm.
physical death.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in romance, it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna die if they don't love me. You know, that kind of, not that kind of die, or the end of death of a career, or death of a relationship, or death of an existence, right? It makes me think of when we read Before I Let Go, right?
Mm-hmm.
The scope of that life or death, those stakes were different. It was still about
Mm-hmm.
whether they were going to have, how their happily ever after was going to come for them, but the stakes of getting there were significantly higher because of what they had endured. So we are
Yeah.
holding on to the hope of that
Mm-hmm.
HEA, but man, are we like, how in the heck is this about to happen? And
Yeah.
that's what keeps us glued to the page. So when you are looking at these two and you're bringing them together, I think what's so great about this story is because of the way she opens it, we understand what's going on in Navarre enough to understand that it is a necessity to have these cadets coming into this war college.
Mm-hmm.
It is a necessity that they have dragon riders, even to the point, which I think is going to come in later. And again, I've only read book one, the fact that you have fewer dragons bonding with humans, and that is a problem as well. And so we have those stakes that are sort of tied to the fantastical elements. And then when we have the love interests and the love triangle of Zayden and Dane, you have the fact that these are her superiors. You have the fact that one is a friend, one is clearly a foe. You have the fact that there is history behind both the friendship and history behind that enemy relationship that goes much deeper than they even are involved in, but it affects them equally. And this is where those two things begin to intertwine.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more that you can bring them together, the more it helps you to ensure that they sort of are trekking together, even though they must be both independent
Mm-hmm.
and dependent as much as possible. Because
Yeah.
if they're dependent, it helps you from having plot holes.
Yes.
We don't
Yes.
want plot holes. And so you are responsible for both, while still drawing the lines and coloring them in.
Yeah.
Right? The magic, the things that we talk about that feels squishy, the dynamics of how we got dragons in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
the relationship between humans and dragons,
Mm-hmm.
the nature of having these borders and walls, and why they need these dragon riders in the first place. All of those things are drawing the lines and coloring them in.
Mm-hmm.
All the while, um, the more that they're drawing in the lines and coloring them in, that affects the fate of that romance.
Yeah.
And this is me being general, but also sort of leaning into the fact of, if you read this book, it's going to be like, oh, okay, I get what she's saying, without us spilling the beans, right? And so what you're looking for is being able to have both of those threads that are equally important,
Yeah.
and on the page. So we
Mm-hmm.
see the progression and the beats and the evolving of that relationship and the trifail of what's going on and what they're doing as a people group to combat the issues that they have, how this affects Violet, how this affects the students and
Mm-hmm.
the college, and how it sort of creates this pressure cooker for them in the college, because it's almost like the energy that's going on the outside walls are turning on the inside, and they're sort of starting to come down on them as students, to the point where now they're fighting to stay alive,
Mm-hmm.
fighting to bond, and essentially some trying to just find a life like
Mm-hmm.
Xaden, right, with the circumstances that they've been given, and even Violet trying to find a new existence that is
Mm-hmm.
unlike anything she ever prepared herself for before, with all the odds stacked against her,
Mm-hmm.
or so we're supposed to believe. And so
Oh, you dropped it, just a little sassy, shady little.
yeah, I'm just playing. I'm like, listen, I got all the tea. But that's what. So I'm saying this, y'all. I'm adding color to be funny, but that's what happens in a romantasy. You
Mhm.
have both, and I think sometimes. What we are finding now is that people will come from either the fantasy side or come from the romance side, and they lean on that, and they're equal, and
Yeah.
they must affect one another. They're not
Mhm.
running parallel.
Yeah.
Even though there are aspects when it may feel like it, they
Mhm.
must be in like almost like ebbing and flowing into each other. And I think that's what makes it both hard and also a part of the appeal
Yeah.
of the niche.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for, if you're going to do something that combines genres. And again, this is going to be true for romantic suspense, mystery romance, right? It's going to be true anytime you're combining genres. Um where it is a like you do become responsible for both genres, but also like that's where the opportunity is as well, right? Like that's where the opportunity is to bring that angle, to surprise your reader, to do something. I don't want to say fresh, because sometimes when we think about doing something fresh,
Doing
we
too much.
mistake that for going off the wall,
Yes.
like breaking our genre conventions. um but there's an opportunity to maximize the fact that you're using both genres, right? To almost like use both genres to fullest effect in your story. But again, it does also mean like, so one of the examples I think about is when you're doing something like romantasy, so you are combining fantasy and you're combining romance. There are some things that you can pull on from fantasy that are going to be incredibly helpful for you. For example, the tools that we use to avoid things like info dumps, right? Like those kinds of tools from one of these genres you're pulling from can really, really help you to maximize the effectiveness of your story. And so deliver that fantasy, deliver it in the best way possible, while still complementing and still doing full justice to the romance as well. And so doing your research, this goes back to your being, well read and reading wide, making sure that you really understand how a romance functions, right? So you're bringing both of them fully firing to the page. And again, that's both the responsibility and the opportunity that you have when you're combining genres like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say info dumping is never good. I don't care what genre you're in,
That's true.
but I think the reason why you have to probably say it more specifically in fantasy is because you have a lot of things that you're aiming to explain to bring people up to date,
Yeah.
versus in like romance, you don't have to say, well, we live in a city,
Yeah.
there's big
Cities
buildings.
have buses.
Right. Right, it's sort of like it's a common knowledge, and you don't have that because the author is creating that common knowledge.
Mhm.
And so we could talk about that like indefinitely, and if you have more questions, definitely ask, but we wanted to sort of set this up. While one last thing I'll say before we go to the next point, because I think we kind of have touched on it, but I'll make sure we did. It sort of made me think about, as you were talking, Rachel, was Woman in the Library.
Mhm.
Woman in the Library is deceptively a great book to look at how a romance can sort of infiltrate in a story, and that the closer she got to him and the more it was questionable as to whether he was the one responsible for the death, the more the stakes increased for her.
Hmm.
And and it becomes this thing of, okay, do I believe them, do I believe him? and
Hmm.
and it and it and it sort of falls into it, and it's sort of like having moments like that where you can clearly delineate in your mind. It helps you a lot of times to start seeing, okay, well, what are the elements, what's at play, and then what does that look like in this space. But I think that was a great one to see, because sometimes people think it has a bigger effect than it actually does. um, but that one, she did that good. Okay.
Yeah.
So so that is the sort of the hybrid nature and the romantasy that we wanted to sort of talk about. We will talk about some of the things that what we're saying now, honestly, is going will build on it as you move forward into the other episodes, so
Hmm.
that when we're sort of giving those tips on either the romance or the fantasy side, it's sort of building with the backdrop of what we're saying today in
Yeah.
mind. So coming back to this may be very helpful to you, and even as you're listening to this, beginning to pick out what the elemental aspects of what I'm saying and what you know to be true about some of your favorite books in this space. Like, how does that
Hmm.
look? How does the stakes look? What how was the romance present? How did the romance affect the stakes that were being brought on by what's going on in the world as they know it? Um, do you feel like the stakes rise up enough to feel like it justifies calling it a fantasy?
Hmm.
Or is it just maybe some fantasy elements? And so just beginning to ask yourself questions like that and how it shows up begins to give you sort of like references as you move forward with massaging and developing your own ideas. And I think it goes a long way. But in the beginning, you are sort of beginning to sort of identify the elements and beginning to group what you're experiencing and what you're feeling and what you are um, reading on the page.
Hmm.
And so we will have those tips on each one of the episodes. The other thing that I said towards the beginning, which is pretty straightforward, of like, this is a book one. You can totally tell it's a book one. It's a setup. It's a setup of what's happening. We see a major turn towards the end that really begins to catapult towards book two. But this is a book one. And so how some of these things land, we don't fully know. I think
Yeah.
overall, like Rachel said, this book does what it needs to do. But I think when you know that there's 3 or 4 books planned for a series and it's interconnected and it's a continuation, then it's just necessary to know that we don't know how well it plays out until we read those stories. Anything else that you want to add to that?
I not to that point. I am gonna
Mhm.
make one. Just this is sort of my like final caveat that I think is just
Mhm.
worth mentioning, mostly as a matter of like professional like dignity,
Come on.
which is um I just want to acknowledge, and specifically because so many of the writers who come to me are fantasy writers. Many of them are kind of hardcore, like high fantasy writers. Um, and so it's worth noting that I think for some fantasy readers, there are some things in this book that may not land for you, and in particular, so there's some vagueness with the world building and the magic. We'll already talk about that in the forthcoming episodes, but I just want to acknowledge, like, there are also some logical gaps in the premise itself. Now I think that I'm not going to go into those. I think those are outside of like the purview of the conversation that we have over the next few episodes. But as someone that, like, my clients come to me and they expect me to be able to spot plot holes and ask me to find those and shore up those things, I feel like I would be remiss not to mention that there are some clear gaps in the logic of the story. But I think there's something really important to highlight about that, is that it bothers some people, it does not bother all people, right?
That's right.
Like it's and I think that that's something to know as well when you're reading wide. You know, there are some questions that she is not interested in answering, that I'm like, wait, I want answers about that. But that's not what the story is wanting to explore and where it's wanting to go. And so giving some space for the fact that, like, there are some things that are going to bother me that don't bother anybody else, and that, like, that is also a part of the subjective experience of reading, and
Mm-hmm.
leaving room for that again across genres, because stories set out to do different things, and depending on what the audience is looking for, we're going to focus on meeting those expectations. And there are some things that we care a lot less about than, again, the things that I'm going to be bothered about. And so I just think it's like worth mentioning that this is a popular critique of the story, and just mentioning that, yes, I see those, I do think they're outside of the purview of the conversation, and that not everybody cares about those things either. And I think that's an important thing to know as well, is like, that's not important to everybody. So I just wanted to add that kind of final note, to sort of just like stick a pin in that before we carry on with the rest of the conversation, really looking at the plot and the characters in detail in the forthcoming episodes.
Y'all, I love Rachel, and I'm about to crack up laughing over here. Listen, I agree. I get it. I get it. Y'all, I get it. I will say this. Um, and this will be the last thing. You will hear me say this many times across the next few episodes. I say this a lot to my clients, which is people caring about your protagonist and their journey will cover a multitude of sins. But here's the thing. When you're working with an editor and you really want to get the story right, we're trying to eliminate as many of them sins as possible. Okay, we trying to get you prayed up. You know what I'm saying? We trying to get you right. So there are times when we just don't understand things, or things don't land as clearly, and it doesn't make this wrong. It doesn't make it wrong. It was right in her world, and that's what she wanted, and this is a story that she wanted to tell. But it does make for great conversation for what we're doing here in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are going to be some things that we just professionally, and if we were talking to a client, y'all, there would be so many things that I would say, and my clients would kill you. Like, oh hell no. but but it's so many things. But here's what's so great about storytelling, and it's like what you said was true. I think the other part of this is like knowing your audience. You saying, for example, that you have a lot of high fantasy clients. I have fewer high fantasy, more, commercially minded, as well as KU exclusive writing, which differs. There are
Yeah.
some that do traditionally publish, but they've been doing it for a long time. So they are locked in. And so every
Mm.
writer and every audience is different. I think what we're saying more than anything is you are responsible for knowing the difference.
Yeah.
Listen, this woman's her name is Rebecca Yarros. She said, I can do whatever the heck I feel like. We're going to say, listen, she say, okay, all right. We're going to let her do it. But if we have the opportunity to read an amazing story and to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and to see things where if we just add an extra couple of sentences here or there,
Yeah.
that it can take the story from me being engrossed in what's going on to, wait a minute, how old is she?
Yeah.
You don't want me stopping to do that.
Yeah.
If I stop to do that, then I may go ahead and close, me like, you know what, I'm gonna read some more tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that little thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's like that, but a bunch of little things can stop the flow.
Yeah.
And so part of what we're talking about is those things. And it's not like nuanced, but I think that's enough of the caveats. The point is, it's up to you. And we hope that the conversations that we have over the next few episodes will give you plenty to consider,
Mm-hmm.
that it will also give you a really strong base for going into your reading.
Mm-hmm.
That we have enough books in in our catalog, and that can definitely come alongside you, that we've mentioned today. We mentioned Miss Born. We had Sin and Chocolate, Sin and Magic. We had a Dead Until Dark. I did mention The Woman in the Library. It's not um,
It's not
fantasy.
fantasy.
It's
Yeah.
not
It's
fantasy,
just.
but the dynamic of the meshing and bringing in romance and it being integral to the plot is
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
So just being able to expose yourself and reading wide, this is where it pays off.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
what we're saying.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And then at the end of the day, you're grown. Do what you want to do. You pay
Yeah,
your own bills.
that's
Do you,
right.
boo? And if you have you have a question and you like our opinion, you know where to find us at
Yeah.
storydeepdive.com. Okay.
Yes,
Anything
ma'am.
else? Right. Look, we did it. Wrap it
No,
up in a
no,
bowl.
nothing left from me. No, I've said enough. I defended my honor as
Come on.
someone who's responsible for finding plot holes and so I've said my piece and made my caveats. So we're gonna dive in the rest of the weeks and go into plot, character, and our takeaways in the coming weeks.
I'm gonna borrow her caveat too. No. Well, all jokes aside, y'all get ready. This is a great a set of episodes. You still have time to read the book. It is a long one.
Yeah,
So
you better
you
get
better crack a
started
whip.
like
Okay.
now.
Crack a whip. Because it is a long one. It's a good one. And over the next few episodes, we will dive more into Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. If you want to know more information about us, see some of the other episodes, check out the bonus episode that we mentioned earlier about genre contracts. You can visit us at storydeepdive.com. You can find us on just about all of your podcast listening platforms. Don't forget to rate, leave a comment, and let us know that you're listening. We are getting more and more listeners, which is fantastic as we do this and get to enjoy great books and great conversations. And if you have recommendations for books you would like for us, because listen, y'all, we are knocking. We are at the halfway point of this year by the time you are listening to this. And so before you know it, we're going to be doing 2027 book picks.
Oh,
And
that
so,
makes me a little nauseous.
you know what? Don't be nauseous. It is what it is. And so, so we will see you next week, same place, same time. Thank you so much for joining us. This is all the caveats, and next is going to be all the yumminess of reading the story. We will see you all really soon. Take care, and as always, happy writing. Goodbye.